we noticed, Mark Cottingham and I noticed during that time right after spring break, that our kids would come back in the student ministries real apathetic, and it was like they'd been in an environment where maybe they didn't participate in all that goes on at the beach, but just being in that environment has a way of deadening your spirit. And they'd come back and the attendance to our youth meetings would fall off, the attendance to his choir rehearsals would fall off, and it really made me start thinking about looking at an alternative for these kids to be involved with on their spring break. And I met Seth Barnes, who's the director for Adventures in Missions, the ministry that we use to go to Mexico with, the missions agency. He and I traveled down there and took a look at Mexico, and I tell you, it was one of those moments where God really spoke clearly to me about this is the place that we need to bring kids. And I could see some of our own students playing with kids in the street and working in those floodplain areas, building homes, and it was a tremendous moment for me. And little did I know that God would use that trip to encourage not only kids today. We took about 30 that year back in April of '92, but it's amazing to me how that one trip really has motivated this church to be on fire for missions. And it's exciting to see how not only kids but men and women of this church have picked up the torch and really are allowing God to use them and to go all around the world sharing the gospel with people.
Our ladies had begun to participate and go to China on multiple years, teaching English as a second language. Well, they did a phenomenal job. The Chinese people were touched by the heart of the Johnson Ferry ladies. Well, one thing led to another, and one of the trips, they went on a field trip to a city called Peng Lai, which was the original home of the Lottie Moon Church. And the ladies were just touched. It's a small 150, 175 person sanctuary that was built in the late 1800s. People would be waiting in line for hours to go to church. Well, one thing led to another, and relationships were built with the Johnson Ferry ladies, and then we got to know the pastor, Pastor Chin, there in Peng Lai, China, and relationships were built and partnerships were discussed, and they asked us to help participate with them to build a new sanctuary. To make a long story short, God worked miraculously in many, many ways to work all the details out. Because imagine Johnson Ferry, Americans building a church in communist China. We had no idea that it was going to be as significant of a program as it ended up being. So God has worked in miraculous ways, and that certainly is in parallel with the way we should think of God here. He's always got bigger plans for us than often we even realize that He does.